The Borders Railway brings so much promise for sharing and invigorating this most beautiful countryside as a place to work, live and enjoy. It is my very happy duty to declare the Borders Railway open.
Her Majesty the Queen performing the official opening ceremony of the Borders Railway on September the 9th, 2015, the day in which she became Britain's longest-running monarch. The line was actually fully open to passengers on September the 6th, but the opportunity to capitalise on worldwide publicity on the 9th was too much of a temptation. In just over 2 years, more than 30 miles of track was laid. Bridges were built or repaired. Magnificent structures such as the Lothian Bridge Viaduct and Beauchamp Tunnel sprung back into life. Almost 45 years after the Beeching Axe fell, trains once again brought passengers from Edinburgh into the Scottish borders via Midlothian. Those who said it would never happen, saw it happen. It may have taken a long time to come, but when work started on the Borders Railway, progress was relentless. It was something new for a generation of people, and there was a lot of excitement. The running of the Borders Railway wasn't always smooth, and the critics said the severe cutting back of double track would cause problems. They were right. There were many cancellations along the way for a variety of reasons, and as a result, passengers were angry. The Scottish Government was also angry, and Abellio, the company brought in to manage the Borders Railway, had their contract torn up before they got near their full term. But the good news was that the Borders Railway attracted more passengers than most people had predicted, and it was soon clear that the line was a big success in many ways. In this programme, we're looking back at the first 5 years of the Borders Railway, exploring what could happen in the future, and we look at the challenges which lie ahead in extending onwards to Hawick and Carlisle. Passengers have used the Borders Railway since it opened. Over 4 million in the first 3 years and over 2 million in 2019 alone, far more than predicted. That was one of the many good statistics which came out. Many businesses reported an increase in sales, while attractions such as Sir Walter Scott's house at Abbotsford saw their visitor numbers go up dramatically. We'll be hearing the views of key people, from politicians to industry professionals. Rail experts and enthusiasts will have their say, and we'll be talking to those whose lives have been changed by the Borders Railway.
A fantastic success story, 5 brilliant years, and lots more to look forward to in the future.
The benefits that have already been felt by the communities on the existing Borders Rail would be spread all the way along the Borders region through to Carlisle.
I actually think an extension's quite a long way off yet, and I don't think that case has been won at all.
We learn the lessons from the past, recognise there's a strong social and economic case. We could be there by 2030.
I'm determined to make sure that we do learn those lessons. So one of the things that we've put in place, and I was keen to make sure we did, was that we provided funding alongside our funding for the new railway line to help to support some of the economic work that can help to develop some of the benefits of a new line.
I can assure you, everybody in ScotRail wants to get this one fixed as quickly as possible, because it's just one of those things that drives us mad that we got that one wrong. So I can assure you there's a huge amount of effort getting put on that one.
OK, you did enough grovelling, we'll let you off on that one.
You can see the demand, you can see how much the railway is being used. They're definitely answering all the questions to take it to Hawick.
Joining me throughout this programme will be Simon Walton, chair of the campaign for Borders Rail. And let's begin with Simon's interview with Managing Director of Scotland's Railway, Alex Hines.
Well, it's been a brilliant success. Passenger numbers have exceeded forecast, and at nearly every timetable change we've had to add additional carriages because customers have been voting with their feet, and it's been so successful. Of course, people want to build it further south, and recently we've had the announcement by Scottish Government around the decarbonisation action plan, which will envisage the electrification of the line between now and 2035. So a fantastic success story, 5 brilliant years, and lots more to look forward to in the future. We would have liked to have it double track all the way. Yes, we would have liked an electric railway, but if we'd insisted on that at the start, it might never have been built. Actually, by building it in the way that we have, we've created a fantastic business case to make the case for further enhancement and indeed electrification as part of the plan to decarbonise. I think that the future clearly is electric, not just because of decarbonisation, but also because of growth, because we have diesel trains on the Borders Railway and no one's building diesel trains anymore. We certainly don't want to be ordering any more diesel trains. So electrifying the railway won't just decarbonise the Borders, it will also give us additional rolling stock for this growth that we're seeing. The Borders Railway is about what the Borders Railway does, which is about connecting people with jobs and affordable homes. You know, the Borders Railway connects some of the poorer parts of Scotland with some of the richer parts of Scotland here in Edinburgh. And that economic artery is changing lives for people in the Borders. It's enabling people to buy their own home without costing an arm and a leg and commuting back into Edinburgh. So railways are extraordinary at creating economic growth, but also quality of life for everybody it touches. Clearly, we need to make sure we're providing a boringly reliable service so that it's a service on which people can depend. And we also need to make sure we're providing extra carriages on those services that operate. And the good news is that as we get more intercity trains here in Scotland for the long distance routes, we can do what's called an internal cascade. So we can operate more carriages on the Borders Railway, so 6 carriage trains in the peak. Vis-a-vis 5 years ago when we launched the railway, we're operating 2 carriage trains, and that just shows you the growth that we're seeing. Of course, we want to see a bigger and better railway for Scotland. That's what we're all about. And given that it's been such a success, Tweedbank to Edinburgh, we'd love to see it extended further south. Clearly that's a matter for UK and Scottish governments, and it's been good to see some encouraging noises recently in this respect.
Well, Simon, we'll be hearing more from you throughout the programme as you chat to a few key people, including Alex Hines again. But putting on your campaign for Borders Rail hat at the moment, what's your own assessment of the first 5 years of the Borders Railway?
Something of a curate's egg. It's been a great success as far as the community is concerned, and I don't think that anyone in the Borders who uses or knows of the railway could in fact do without it anymore. But that's something that the campaign has always said, and we always said that there'd be many people would use this railway. I think there's been many more people have used this railway than was predicted by the rather pessimistic business case. So consequently, we've had times when the railway's been, well, just overcrowded and unreliable, and there's been a number of reasons for that. I think over the 5 years, the campaign has been the Borders Railway's greatest ambassador, but also its keenest critic, and for good reason. We want to see this as being the best possible railway for the Borders, and that means improvements down the line, improvements going forward, and encouraging even more people to use it.
Well, today we're going to be taking a trip to Carlisle, stopping off at some of the key places on the way, also looking at some of the engineering challenges in bringing the Waverley route back. And the first job is to get the track through to Melrose. How do you see that happening?
Well, it's only a matter of a few miles, but it is a few challenging miles to get the railway from here at Tweedbank on to Melrose, where ultimately it should have been in the first place. And Melrose will be an important stop on the re-established line. Broadly speaking, Solom of the line is still there. There has been some road development which we're going to have to examine, but I think getting through to Melrose itself whilst an engineering challenge, is by no means impossible, and indeed by no means the most difficult thing that's been accomplished in building the Borders Railway as it stands.
Well, that's going to be our first stop on the journey to Carlisle, but we did online ask people who were interested in the Borders Railway to give us their thoughts and questions. So we're going to put you through a little Q&A, starting with Harry Tomczyk, Gareth Zachariah and James Hill. I hope I've pronounced them correctly. Harry says, with all the emphasis on extending very expensively to Carlisle, what about reopening the line via Kelso to Berwick? No big hills, he says, and of course a useful diversion route when the East Coast line north of Berwick has problems. Easy for people as well, particularly tourists coming from the south to get to the borders and us to get to the south. What about that?
Okay, a couple of things to address there. First of all, it needn't necessarily be an expensive project. When you compare it with other infrastructure projects around the UK, this will be 66 miles of main line, which will be achieved for a fraction of the cost of HS2, a fraction of the cost of Crossrail, and a fraction of the cost of many other non-transport infrastructure projects which are going on around the UK. Yes, it will be a lot of money, but it won't be as expensive as you might imagine. Now, of course, the Waverley Route main line, which is what we're concentrating on, and it is the campaign's preferred option that the main line be reinstated between Edinburgh, Midlothian, the Borders and Carlisle. Now, there were many other lines, a whole web indeed of lines which came off that and served every significant community in the Borders, including those that have just been mentioned. And there was a line which went across to the East Coast and joined the East Coast main line. Now, we're suggesting that in the first instance, we should look at that main line, re-establishing that as the spine of an integrated public transport network for the entire Borders. And the reason being, it was the main line, it was the most direct route, it served the most populous parts of the Borders, and it provides the best and most direct route to reintegrate with the national network. And that really is the overall benefit of a re-established Borders Railway and Waverley route. It will be fundamentally a great asset for the entire national network.
So a lighter one from Stephen Oliver, who comes from Duns, and he's enjoyed travelling to Tweedbank to get the Borders Railway to Edinburgh on a regular basis. And he also harks back to the very early days when Stow was mispronounced. And we've actually got a clip of that, so we're going to remind ourselves now for the very last time.
This is Stow. This train is for Tweedbank. The next stop is Galashiels.
Do you know what? It gives me a chance to look at you and through you to the good people of the Borders and apologise profusely for that one. It was just an unforgivable mistake. It was in the rush to get everything up and running. We got all the recordings done and it just slipped through the net. It's a bad mistake, and we're really embarrassed about it in truth, and we just want to get it fixed. Again, it's not just a question of flicking a switch and it gets sorted. There's all sorts of data systems that have to get loaded up, and GPS and all these different things that have to happen. So the last time we checked with the guys who were working on this problem, they said it's going to be another couple of weeks before it's done. But I can assure you, everybody in ScotRail wants to get this one fixed as quickly as possible, because it's just one of those things that drives us mad that we got that one wrong. So I can assure you there's a huge amount of effort getting put on that one.
Okay, you've done enough grovelling, we'll let you off on that one.
So there we are, that was Rob Shorthouse, the communication director at the time of ScotRail, rather embarrassed but enjoying in with the fun of it as well. But funnily enough, it kind of put Stow on the map, didn't it?
Yeah, do you know, there's been a lot of fun connected with the Borders Railway. That's just one prime example of it. I think it's important because, it doesn't matter how Stow was pronounced, the fact that Stow actually got a lot of national coverage and that community was put back on the map, that's something that the Borders Railway has brought to communities like Stow. It's really put them back on the map. And that's really important because it's not just about a little bit of fun, it's not just something ephemeral. It really does actually encourage the sort of inward investment, the sort of business development that this railway and this campaign is all about. We are seeking to bring prosperity to the Borders, to socially include everyone in the Borders, and of course provide an environmentally sustainable way to get around. That's what this project's all about.
Kenneth Gunn has been in touch as well. He says the whole Waverley line must be restored restored, the Scottish Borders has suffered massive job losses and investment losses since 1969. So more of a statement there, but he's spot on.
I wouldn't argue with a word that Kenneth has said there, absolutely not. The line has to be reinstated because that's the best and most tangible way to get the borders back on the map, to get the borders reconnected, to give opportunities to generations coming that there are places to work and places to live in the borders. It's a place to raise families, it's a place to make your life for generations to come. What we're doing now with the Borders Railway and the campaign to extend it is leaving a legacy that will be around for 100 years.
But we'd like to thank everyone who wrote in with their questions. Just one more, in fact, from an anonymous rail driver. I didn't want to put his name to this, but he was very concerned that if freight ever went on the line, it would wreck the line.
Freight is very much part of the business plan for the Borders Railway and the Borders Railway extension, and it will not wreck the line. Whatever other shortcomings there may have been with the Borders Railway, it was built to the very highest of standards and it can take any traffic whatsoever. I very much hope that freight will be part of the future line, and I assure you it will not wreck the line.
OK, I think it's time for our journey to start. We're at Tweedbank. Next stop, Melrose. So this is the gorgeous Melrose station that's behind us. First of all, I mean, what are they going to do? Because all the stations along the route and everywhere these days, very, very modern. Are they going to build on from this, or what are they going to do you think?
Well, you know, it's not within my gift to say so, but it would be a fool who didn't do anything other than retain Melrose Station, because imagine what a fantastic attraction this is going to be on the line as we head either north or south from Carlisle or from Edinburgh or from any intermediate point, indeed from further afield, to come here to beautiful Melrose and this beautiful station.
Now, of course, you can see behind us we've got the bypass, which was, of course, the old track. Plenty of traffic on it now as well, and something which I think you've got a few thoughts about.
I'm really glad that we've come to Melrose because, you know, where we're standing now represents to me the worst part of doing away with the Waverley route. Here we have this community which was once connected and communicated with the rest of the Borders and the rest of Scotland, the rest of the UK from its station. What does it get in return? Its train services taken away, disenfranchising so many of the people that lived here, and they get this bypass, which isn't really a bypass, of course, because it's a road that runs straight through the middle of the community. And instead of having a train which actually serves the community, they're condemned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to the roar of traffic thundering through the middle of the town. Now, I know that governments these days want to apologise for their past mistakes. Well, I say to governments in Britain, you know, it's time to apologise to the people of Melrose and apologise to the people of Borders for taking away their railway, taking away their social inclusion, and reinstate this railway so that everyone can play a part in the life of Scotland, the life of the nation.
So what's going to happen with the bypass, do you think?
Well, look, there's an Edinburgh bypass that's been overcome, there's a Dalkeith bypass that's been overcome, there will be a Melrose bypass that will be overcome. It's a road, it was built over the railway, it can be moved out of the way of the railway. There's still room to bring a railway through here. This compromise has to be made, and that's all it takes, a little bit of compromise.
Going back to the station again, we've seen at Bank. The old platform is still there, it's overgrown, but it's just a few yards further down the track. Do you think they might build the new Melrose station almost next to this one?
It's possible, of course, if it better serves the community, yes, but I would argue that this station is best placed to do that. It's best placed to serve the community, it's best placed as a stone-built ambassador for the community.
So we're going to St Boswell's now. This should be straightforward until you get to St Boswell's itself, because there's been quite a lot of development since the closure in '69.
Yes, and there was quite a lot of development on the northern section, the Borders Railway, but it's nothing that can't be overcome. Where there's a will, there's a way, and there's a definite will here to extend this railway.
So we've come along the Melrose bypass, turned right towards St Boswell's and Newtown St Boswell's, and really not much evidence that there was a railway here.
Well, there isn't, Stuart, that's for sure. It's rather overgrown, but it wouldn't take a great deal to remove this vegetation and reinstate the railway. We're actually standing in the middle of the main line that will take trains from Tweedbank through Newton St Boswell's and on to Howick and Carlisle. And it's a tiny little village, Newton St Boswell's, but has a great heritage as part of the Borders Railway network. I know it looks a bit verdant for it, but this was Grand Central of the Borders Railway. Every station was connected to Newton St Boswell's, and it was a very important junction at one time. It will be a very important little station on the line again. We came here to Hassendene because it's an example of many of the rural communities that were served by little halts up and down the Waverley route, as was. As with any civil engineering project, be that the building of a school or a hospital or a housing estate or indeed a railway, that does mean a massive upheaval during the building phase and afterwards, and it will mean a change of lifestyle here in this beautifully restored station at Hassendene. It may mean that some aspects of Tom's life have to change.
Well, when we came across it, it was completely derelict, so that was back in the 80s, and we restored it and now live here. And in one way I'll be sad to lose the buildings when the railway comes back, but in no doubt it should come back, really. However, it's a problem that we must face, I think.
Do you feel that perhaps the buildings could be retained here when the railway comes through?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It would be difficult for me to get from the house to my office because the bridge would go because of electrification. That wouldn't stay, of course. The buildings would be nice to be kept, but I don't know the proximity to the railway.
Stations like this, they were built to serve a purpose which is perhaps 100 years out of date now, to serve the agricultural community when it was difficult to get around any other way. And this opened up the markets for those people in agriculture over a century ago. I think it's good that when the railway comes back, it will again open up the community in new ways for the 21st century.
Absolutely. It would bring vibrance back to the community again, back to Howick.
Tom, you've lived here for 20 years, and obviously you've done a great deal with the station here, made it into your home.
Yes, and office.
And office, and
yes.
You live, you work here, you have guests here.
Yes.
But that will change when the railway does come through.
Indeed, it's something that we'd be quite sad about, in fact, because where else would you find another place like this to live? But, realistically, the railway should come back to regenerate the whole place. I mean, bring back life to Howick, bring back life to the Borders, in fact.
Of all the communities along the Waverley route, Howick suffered the most when the line closed. We're going to hear from two politicians from different parties who are based in the town. Both would love to see trains once again travel through Howick.
Well, I'm very clear that we need to see the railway extended to Howick, Newcastle and on to Carlisle. That will ensure that all or more parts of the Borders are able to get the opportunity of good transport links. And I think the key is ensuring we have an integrated transport network, so not just those residents who are able to access a station very, very easily, but those people who maybe live a bit further afield are able to get access to a station to be able to get the advantage of having access to good train service.
The Prime Minister has expressed interest in a number of projects which, ideologically would unite the United Kingdom, a bridge perhaps between Scotland and Northern Ireland. But I put it to you that an extended Borders Railway is a more achievable ambition which fulfills that desire to further enhance the union.
Absolutely, and I think one of the benefits of the Border Railway is it crosses both sides of the border. So not only does it tick the box in terms of investment in railways or roads, but it links both parts of the United Kingdom together, Scotland and England. So there's many benefits, but confirming the unity between our countries, I think, is an important one as well.
Perhaps not you and I will benefit most from it, but it will be younger generations, young people who are in our schools at the moment, and perhaps they should be taking up the baton as well.
And they are. I mean, when you speak to young people, many of them already use the railway from Gala Shields to go to Edinburgh, so they travel from Hawick up to the station in Gala to get to the train, or some of them go to Carlisle to get the train to go elsewhere within the United Kingdom. So people do see the benefit of the train, and they also see, I think, by having a station more local to them, so within Hawick, it would open up other opportunities for them as well. So undoubtedly, for the opportunities that having a railway here, having a station here would give our young people, I think, strengthens the case to ensure that, so I would encourage any young person who thinks that good transport links are important is to get behind the Borders Railway campaign.
Hawick was a powerhouse of the economy in the south of Scotland. Obviously the textile mills were at their height, but that railway today can help make Hawick somewhere that people can do business in by commuting in. People can commute out to work elsewhere. We can make it accessible for education, for people going outward bound to university or college, and inward bound to facilities here as well. There's a campus for the Borders College just along the road there. So, it's about trying to pump some life back into that communication artery that used to really feed the economy of this town, and it was one of the most prosperous places in the south of Scotland when at its height. So I would hope the railway line can really bring that back.
Do you really believe that a railway could facilitate that sort of economic regeneration?
I think so. I mean, we're seeing amazing things already happening off the back of the railway as far as it's come to Tweedbank. That's not far enough in my view, obviously, and since my first speech in Parliament I've advocated coming all the way down to Hawick and to Carlisle. But the railway line as it stands, it was projected to have just 1.3 million passenger journeys a year. It's already hitting 2 million a year, and with a lot of the house building on the route still to happen. So it's been a phenomenal economic success. That's been acknowledged by the Transport Scotland and the government. I really believe that if the railway line came to Hawick and down to Carlisle, it would confine people, and it would give Scotland a third cross-border railway line, which could be a really important thing for the economic resilience of the country and transport resilience, and also offer opportunities for things like rail freight. We already know that potentially the railway line will be electrified all the way down to Tweedbank, which is brilliant news. And imagine if we had a railway line all the way to Carlisle that was electrified and could provide that rail resilience for Scotland, not just for Hawick and the Borders.
To smarten up things like the High Street, to, if you like, bring the community together, the community really has to speak out, and I think the community has to step up collectively and say, we want this railway as a fundamental way of facilitating our regeneration.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with you there. I know Hawick people can be very passionate, and they can make their feelings known, and that's tremendous. But also, we need to make sure that's visible to decision makers. So I would encourage people to join the campaign for Borders Rail for one area, for example, because that could mean that membership, growth in membership in Hawick is something that the campaign can report and say that there's clearly strong demand from in Hawick. They can volunteer, they can help share things, car stickers. Every time a Transport Scotland official comes through Hawick, I'd like to see them see a campaign for Borders Railway sticker in the back of every car. That would send the message, would it not? So I think these are all really helpful ways in which we, but at a political level, all elected members, and I'd say this for myself as well, we have to get together and work together. There has been some silly politics in the past. I think we all acknowledge that. We've got some tremendous advocates for the railway line, and we're doing our own thing individually, but if we pull together, I think that will be really powerful.
Is it going to take a significant element of cross-border cooperation?
I think inevitably it will. The railway line, obviously, sometimes it's been pitched at one government or the other. We need in practice both governments to work together. There's a structure for that now under the Borderlands arrangements. Both governments are committed to £5 million to funding their own feasibility studies, and those studies will join together to form an overall picture of the viability of the project. About 20 odd miles of the track is in the other side of the border in England, so clearly we need UK ministers' involvement, and in fact in legal terms, because it is a cross-border project, the UK government has to give the go-ahead, and they're the ultimate determinants of whether it happens or not. But I'm sure It's a good opportunity for governments to work together. Yes, we have our differences as governments, as you know, on matters of constitutional issues, but we have got a track record of working together as well when it's around economic regeneration or tackling a crisis. So hopefully we can see positive working here and make this happen. And I'm feeling very much more confident now we have that the feasibility studies underway and funded. I think that is going to be a very important step.
What do you see the community of Hawick looking like in 20 years' time?
So I think it's inevitable, and I think the global pandemic's kind of brought this forward a wee bit, that we're going to see less of the bricks and mortar shops. We're going to see less of the traditional industries in the borders. I mean, we're looking at things like MTEL that provide telecommunications infrastructure and things like this rather than factories. I think we're going to see high streets that maybe more in the European style, more geared towards things that you can't physically buy over the internet. I mean, I might not need it myself, but a haircut. We're looking at things like cafes, restaurants. And I think that there needs to be a huge push behind the tourism. We are, like I said, we're sitting on a real untapped resource in the Scottish borders. We have the existing things there for people to come and see. We just need to sell that more, and I think that's going to be a huge part of the economy in years to come.
And do you see a re-established railway playing a fundamental part in that?
Absolutely. I think it can only benefit the number of people that will come to see Hawick and the number of people, the number of day trippers as well. It's quite difficult at the moment. If you're coming from, especially from Carlisle direction, if you're coming from England, it's very difficult to have a day trip in the area. And I think the railway and the decreased journey times will definitely help towards that.
Well, Simon, we've moved over to Stobbs, a place with a dark history.
It is, yeah. Can you imagine in the First World War, 14 to 18, being here? There'd be 20,000 prisoners of war here, and all of them being decamped just down the hill there at Stobbs Station, a tiny little hamlet it was built to serve, and it was open for the whole duration of the Borders Union Railway, but that was its busiest time. And you can see behind me here the old telegraph office, where remarkably actually German prisoners were allowed to send messages back to their families. It was a different time back then. It would be difficult, and it probably would be irrelevant to rebuild a place like Stobbs, because society has moved on. Very fewer people work on the land now, and we do have personal mobility, and the railways are used for very different reasons. The railways are used for communication between larger communities and for getting to the centres of population. So it's very unlikely that in railway terms there would be any viability for a place like Stobbs. And you can see around us that there really isn't any population lives here. The people that would have worked this land, their descendants are now in bigger communities, which will be served directly by the railways. And the few people who live here wouldn't make it viable for a railway station.
Of course, some of the bridges and the structures are still here, and including the one at Stobbs.
Yes, indeed, there's a very spectacular viaduct here at Stobbs, very similar to the viaducts which crossed the rivers in Hawick and which were demolished. A bit of civic vandalism, in my opinion. They will have to be replaced. Let's be thankful that the one here at Stobbs and the very much grander affair at Shank End is still extant, because without them it would be a very much more difficult job to re-establish the line through Hawick and onto Carlisle.
Well, Simon, the irony of where we're standing at the moment is that there never was a station at Wittrope, but after it closed, up pops a station.
Yeah, you know, this used to be a little request halt. You'd actually get on the train here going to school and use some steps to get up onto the train then. But you're right, there never was a station here at Wittrope where the Waverley Route Heritage Association have established their base. Obviously, this would be in jeopardy when the line reopens. So I suspect that the association, with whom the campaign have very good relations, might consider relocating just a couple of miles down the line to the historic Riccarton Junction, where they might have more extensive area to work with.
Now there's about a mile and a half of track down here. They were hoping to go through the Wittrup Tunnel at some point, and a few years ago they did actually try and seek permission, and there was an inspection and it was decided that it wasn't safe and they couldn't do that, which was disappointing, of course. But as you say, when the line does return here, obviously they will have to relocate.
Yeah, look, the fact that the heavy lifting, if you like, on the civil engineering has already been done up and down the Waverley route, and it's more than just putting the tracks back in, but the viaducts, the bridges are there, the tunnels are there. Yes, they do need repairing. Yes, they do need maintenance and bringing up to standard, but they are there. So we've got a head start on that. And that really is important, because if these things weren't there, then bringing the railway back would be a very much more difficult prospect. Wittrup Tunnel is one of the challenges, and there are a number of challenges on the line, but they can't be unsurmountable. We've proved this already with the Borders Railway to the north, getting past the Edinburgh bypass and bringing back into life Lothian-Burn Viaduct. We can bring back Wittrup Tunnel, we can bring back Shank End Viaduct, we can bring back Riccarton Junction and make this line viable and make this a through route all the way to Carlisle.
We will build and rebuild those vital connections to every part of the UK, because now is the moment to strengthen that incredible partnership between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And that's why the Chancellor and I have set up Project Speed, to scythe through red tape and get things done.
So there we are. That's a man who wants to build. That has to be fantastic news for people like you.
Let's not forget that a project like this isn't just about reinstating a railway. It's about economic development, it's about social inclusion, it's about environmental sustainability. And all of these things are things which benefit the community at large in the Borders, and indeed the community at large throughout the whole of the nation, however you define the nation. So building this railway will leave a legacy that will improve the lives of people who are yet to be born. And that's the real reason why I, for one, am involved with the campaign. We're really doing something which will be looked on as a legacy for generations to come. Greg, we're on the side of the level crossing, the famous level crossing here in Newcastleton, where, in fact, you organised a reenactment of possibly the most famous event on that day that the railway closed, when the community turned out and locked the level crossing gates, and indeed the minister was arrested for his part in that. Tell me a little bit about what you've been told about that, what the community knows about that, and what prompted your reenactment.
I think that it is something that you were, in the early days, you were brought up with, about them trying to stop the train, and the characters involved who managed to do that, and the stories that they're told. I think like any community at that time, we were afraid of what would happen with the closure of the railway, not only because of the job losses that were involved, but I don't think anyone at that time realised the potential impact that it finally has had. So, as the years went by, the story grew greater and greater to just probably show, we couldn't fight any harder. We tried to stop a train, we tried to hold a government minister up, but it just shows that many others could have tried a lot harder, I think. And it took a small community, Newcastleton, to try and bring that to the attention of the country. And we done that again last year to reenact the act. And at about the same time, a late night, and the village turned out to sort of have a small reenactment of that fateful day. And Newcastleton was the key settlement for many areas. It was a vibrant community, lots of employment. We really were the centre of the borderlands at that time for connectivity. And when they took that away, the impact could never have been seen unless they would never have closed the railway. But certainly we have a line here that, with a little bit of modernisation, could be fit for use in a very short time. And that is the important thing, that this is shovel ready very quickly. No planning, no other reasons to stop it. The diggers could be here in a week, and we could have a railway line in 2 or 3 years' time. We need the will of the government to start pushing it, which I think they have the courage now. Borderlands, both governments are working really hard, and if they can work together, England, Scotland, it's never been easy. It's not easy at football or rugby, but they're going to have to work together on this. And it'll change an entire community, not just Newcastleton, but it is not 40 miles of wilderness. It is 40 miles that a train must pass through to get to Carlisle, or from Carlisle to Edinburgh. And this is the route it should come, and it will open up Northumberland National Park. It will open up Cumberland, North Cumbria. It'll give opportunities to the people in Dumfries and Galloway. It is a game changer for the borders, and I think people north of here who think that it's at Galashiels, it's a long way to Carlisle, they should look. The Borders Railway as it stands is not a railway in its fullness. It must go to Carlisle to be a proper mature railway. It must go to Carlisle.
Is the infrastructure of the village, of the community, holding back the economic development of the area?
Yes, it is, without a doubt. I think, as previously said, when the railway was here, we had a thriving economy. Now, it was 50, 60 years ago when that was buoyant and bubbling. And everybody thought the car was a new vogue and a new vein. And yes, it's done its job, but now we're moving from the car to encouraging people back onto different modes of transport, and there's a big effort to do that, and we want to play our part in that. We are desperate to play our part in that by having the railway back, and we don't see a way of having a strong rural transport network without having the railway. It's the only way that can join up all the communities down this line from here to Carlisle, and the only way that we can feed the affluent south from down there into this part of the south of Scotland. And given the level of investment that the Scottish Government has given the new South of Scotland Enterprise Agency and ploughed into the new Borderlands concept across the 5 counties that surround us, there's really no reason why that shouldn't happen. We can't fathom why it wouldn't happen, to be honest. We want to repopulate. We do not want to be a retirement town where it's an attractive for old people to come and live. Yeah, great, we welcome everybody, but we want to keep our young people. We want new young families to come and live here, and the way we do that is invest in the infrastructure to make it accessible and to connect people, and the railway is hugely part of that.
What in economic terms does the Carlisle and Settle do for the communities along that line that might be replicated in the borders?
It's almost a no-brainer, really, because it's tourism, it's tourist revenue. And we're seeing this just at the moment, actually, on the Settle Carlisle line. For the first time ever, we have a scheduled, first-class, diesel-hauled, lovely carriages train that is running just between the end of July and the 12th of September, ferrying people backwards and forwards between Appleby, which is maybe 25-30 miles from Carlisle, and down to Skipton in North Yorkshire. And this is proving a real success. We're tapping a new tourist market, middle range. It's not the steam specials where you pay £200 for premier dining. It's people who are prepared to pay £30, £40, £50 and travel this wonderful line of ours in luxury. And that's a real success, first time ever. We could do exactly the same, I think, with the reopened Waverley line, and it would be really beneficial to communities along the way.
What do you think the picture might be in 20 years' time if we see all our ambitions come to fruition and the Borders Railway extended through to Carlisle and reinstated as a strategic part of the national network?
We have the third main route from northern England and further south to Edinburgh. We can see regular services using the type of train you see behind me, which will be stopping services for local people for all the good reasons we've already spoken about. We can see steam trains. You've already had 1 or 2 on the Waverley line. Now it makes sense to extend those. Maybe we'll run them all the way up from Yorkshire, the Midlands to Edinburgh, because the scenery is fantastic.
What do you see as the overall benefits of a re-established Waverley route, a completed Borders Railway connecting up with the national network once again?
If it has to be one sentence, then I would say it is going to benefit the economy of the whole Borders and Carlisle area, and it's going to benefit the local people. What more could you ask?
Do you see right now opportunities for freight on an extended Borders Railway?
I do, basically just for capacity. Anything north of Crewe with HS2, etc., we're looking at real constricts on freight paths, even down to maybe 2 an hour maximum. Well, as you know, the importance of the central belt of Scotland to deliver intermodal traffic is vital for both sides of the border. But to have an alternative route to actually be able to go to the east side of Scotland directly, even if it's only 1 or 2 paths per day, will take that pressure off the freight paths that are there at the moment and will be swallowed up by HS2.
Now, you've mentioned HS2, of course, and the High Speed Rail Group produced a report very recently in which they said that to extract the best return on investment from HS2, there were several things which were needed. And almost at the top of their list was extension of the Borders Railway to do exactly as you said, release capacity on the West Coast Main Line, which is the busiest mixed-use railway in Europe.
It is, and to be fair, it's just common sense. It's not rocket science or anything like that. Even if we go back to putting things like the Serpil report in the 90s, where it identified key freight corridors, similar to what they have in Europe, which gives us a really fast, effective, clear railway for freight. It's a part of the network that's forgotten and neglected. But within COVID-19, I think we've seen the importance of freight, the actual emergence of how important getting goods quickly and efficiently and carbon neutrally as well across the whole of the country from north to south.
I know that carbon neutral is something which is very much on the agenda at DRS, but can you just explain to me how just 1 or 2 freight paths a day can make a difference to a high-speed railway line like the West Coast Main Line?
Well, we did some work for the Department of Transport on the effect of Tesco's modal shift to a heavily used rail modal as opposed to just road. And the train services that DRS provide for Tesco's reduced Tesco's CO2 emissions by 50% just on those elements going from the central belt of Scotland into Wales and things like that. So it's actually huge, the amount of CO2 savings you can have by doing that modal shift to rail from road.
But is it the fact that, fast though they are, freight trains aren't necessarily as fast as express passenger trains, and the nature of the railways, there's obviously no room to overtake, means that a freight train can take up a lot of capacity on the line, and by having that alternative, in this case a completed Borders Railway, would make a great difference to the network overall?
It would. It was a sad case of events that maybe 2 years ago the average speed of a freight train on the network was about 14 miles an hour. But it's all down to pathing. And if you can't get a path, it doesn't matter what speed wagons you've got, you'll be put in sidings or loops or slow lines, and that will reduce your effectiveness on the railway. So the Borders Railway, for me, would be a vital artery to actually relieve that pressure onto the West Coast Main Line and the Caledonian Railway and transfer it to the Borders Railway, or the MB Railway as I like to call it.
Carlisle has a great deal of potential which is on the verge of being realised, and there are some moves afoot in that respect right now, aren't there?
Yes, Carlisle's, in my view, a wonderful city with a rich heritage, tremendous history, but we also have to look to the future. And we see an opportunity with the Borders Railway, with the Borderlands Growth Initiative, with the revamped Carlisle station, to see growth and expansion in this city.
There is a market there in the Borders which can engage with Carlisle, and that surely must be of mutual benefit.
Well, I think it's a very exciting opportunity. Carlisle is a great railway station in its own right, but reconnecting into the Borders I think would be hugely beneficial for Carlisle, but also for the Borders region. And it's not just about passengers, it's also about freight and the opportunities that the freight companies could have in taking their loads up to Edinburgh and beyond. But I think it's a very exciting opportunity for the Borders region, for Carlisle City, and for railway enthusiasts as well. I often see Carlisle as very much at the centre of the Borderlands region. You could argue it's its capital, a very significant part of the economic environment. It's a growing city. You're seeing a lot of housing development around here, but it also wants to make sure it connects into the other parts of the region and also beyond, up to Edinburgh as well. And I can see that, for example, Carlisle could be a real attraction to people who live in the Borders. They may not want to live in this side of the border, they may not want to live in a city, but they do want the rural life, but they want the connectivity, the ability to get in an easy way to a major centre. So that's the other opportunities that will arise from the development of the railway as well. And it's also about taking traffic off the roads, and safety, and it's about the environment. So there are other positives in the development of the Borders Railway.
In the series Borders Railway from Start to Finish, one of the people we spoke to was rail consultant and author David Spaven. And 5 years on, we caught up with him again to get his assessment on how the Borders Railway had done.
I mean, clearly a lot of people have been using the railway. It's been very popular, and that's great news. But the fact is that the forecasts for the railway were very, very pessimistic, so it's done vastly better than forecast, but the forecasts were all wrong to start with. However, it's a good thing, lots of people are using it, it's been helpful to the Borders economy and indeed to Midlothian, so that's a very big plus. I think on the downside though, there's the problem that the service has not generally been reliable. As I think a lot of us know, the railway was built down to a specification that really skimped on the infrastructure. So we've got a situation where, in terms of punctuality and reliability, the Borders Railway has been one of the poorer performers in Scotland over the last 5 years. And that really shouldn't be the case with a new railway. But we know the background. The accountants got in there. They said the business case doesn't stack up, partly because of these absolutely hopeless passenger forecasts. So they skimped on double track. Instead of 16 miles of double track, we got 9.5 miles of double track. And plenty of wise heads said, look, you'll rue this in the long term. It's penny wise, pound foolish. And so it's proved. So we've got a railway that's not very reliable.
And those are certainly lessons that we've learned operationally in the 5 years. Is there anything that we can take forward as lessons learned that could be implemented in the future, if not just for the Borders Railway, maybe for the railway in general?
I think this question of passenger forecasting lies at the heart of what we should learn for the future. And I think the forecasting methods that have been used over the years have really been thoroughly discredited now. If you look at the border stations, in the first year, the stations at Carlisle and Stow, the figures were out by over 300%. In the case of Tweed Bank, the figures were out by over 600%. So a massive forecasting failure. And really, for the sake of pushing on to Hawick, for the sake of other railways in Scotland that might be reopened, we really need to look at that forecasting and try and get it right in light of the Borders Railway experience.
That was really a dreadful hand that was dealt to Abellio ScotRail, who were the managers of the railway. And in that respect, has that contributed to Abellio's downfall as the managers of ScotRail?
I really wouldn't like to speculate on how far the Borders Railway has influenced what is going to happen to Abellio. But I do think it's right that they were dealt a difficult hand in terms of the infrastructure they ended up with. The forecast led to the poor business case. We saw the double track stripped back. And that then is another lesson again for other parts of Scotland. Don't build a penny wise, pound foolish new railway. They wouldn't do it with roads. Roads are never built down like that. They're always built to the gold-plated central standard. And we need to have a bit of level playing field between road and rail in the future.
20 years from now, if we're standing here in 2040, not 2020, looking at 25 years of the Borders Railway, what do you see the position to be then? Where might we be as a railway? Where might we be as a community? Where might we indeed be as a nation?
I think by then, clearly, there'll be an electric railway to Tweed Bank. I think by then it will carry on through Melrose, St Boswell's to Hawick. There might be a railway carrying timber south of Hawick from Kielder Forest and all the other forests that cross the border there. There might be long-distance trains from Edinburgh to Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, etc. It's crystal ball territory, but I think we can safely say there'll be a lot more railway in the Borders then than there is now. I think in terms of getting to Hawick, I don't see any reason why we couldn't get to Hawick by 2030. If we learn the lessons from the past, recognise there's a strong social and economic case, we could be there by 2030.
One of the main people behind delivering the Borders Railway was the then leader of the Scottish Borders Council, David Parker. And I wondered if he was as confident of getting the line extended as he was getting the line built from Edinburgh to Tweed Bank.
No, I wouldn't say I'm that confident that as I was in the first place. I think the first business case and the work done to take it from Edinburgh to Tweed Bank, in some respects, although it was a colossal project to deliver, it was a relatively easy project to deliver in engineering terms. And although there were lots of arguments around the project, I always felt that there was significant political momentum behind it because the three councils were working together and because we had some really great campaigners and other people on it. Now, we're 5 years on since the railway came to Tweed Bank, and we're still not yet at the stage where the next stage of the feasibility has even begun. We're only at the very early stages of starting that feasibility study, and there's certainly been a loss of momentum in my opinion. And although we've had lots of warm words, I don't sense there's the same political impetus to try and deliver it, and I don't think there's the same sense of momentum. And I worry about COVID and the economic impact that will have on major projects up and down the country. So although I'm pleased to see the feasibility study, I actually think an extension's quite a long way off yet, and I don't think that case has been won at all. You know, the last time round when we were doing this, as well as the campaign for Borders Rail, there was a joint parliamentary committee in the Scottish Parliament. There isn't this time. There's not been any serious debate about the line in the Scottish Parliament or at Westminster in the last period of time. And certainly, although we get warm words from politicians saying they support its extension, I don't think there's the same energy being thrust into that support that we saw to secure the line originally. So I think all of those who aspire to deliver the Borders Railway really need to up their game if they genuinely think and they want this project to happen. The one exception, of course, is the campaign for Borders Rail, who have been utterly tremendous. They were hugely important in delivering the line originally. We could not have done it without them. And certainly their momentum, their commitment and their work rate has been incredible. And they've done some really fantastic things over that 5-year period. But politicians from all parties and all the councils need to match the campaign for Borders Rail and really start to shout to make the Borders Railway extension happen.
Could you give a nudge to a few of your colleagues?
Oh, I hope I will certainly do my best to give a nudge to a number of people as we approach the 5th year anniversary. And I do so hope that we can see more momentum into the project. It really pains me that 5 years after we've had such a successful opening and that continued success year on year, that feasibility work is really only just getting underway now. And that certainly tells you something about that loss of momentum. Certainly what needs to happen is that the feasibility study needs to be concluded quickly, and I worry that it will take 2 years to conclude. And then there needs to be a clear path on agreeing how you implement it and move forward. And the danger of feasibility studies is you spend 2 years producing them, and then you spend another 2 years talking about them, and then ultimately you get into a cycle of can we deliver this or not deliver it. Although I've heard lots of promises of money, no one has ever actually committed any money to extending the line, and neither government has committed to extending the line. They've committed to looking at it, but they've not committed to extending it. The easiest thing to do would just be to commit that you're going to deliver this project, even if that'll take 15 years to deliver. There's no harm in now saying we'll deliver it, we'll do the feasibility study, and then we'll go away and work out how we fund it. You know, that commitment could have been made. It hasn't been made, and certainly I think we need to not take our eye off the ball here in relation to this line. There needs to be a real concerted campaign to make sure it happens, and certainly the campaign for Borders Rail need more help and support from the politicians and from those in a position of power to make this project happen.
OK, so 5 years of the Borders Railway. We always remember the famous day, September the 6th, the first passenger trains left here. September the 9th, the Queen becoming the longest serving monarch that day on the 9th, which is why, of course, we had the official opening on that day. It was a fantastic occasion. So it's 5 years. What about its progress report in your own opinion?
Well, I think it's done extremely well. It exceeded all expectation. It wasn't a white elephant. A huge number of people have used it. Its passenger numbers have way exceeded anything that anyone predicted, and it's been tremendously successful. It had teething troubles in the early days, as all new projects do, and actually one of the reasons in the first 18 months it struggled so significantly was because many more people than said they would use it actually chose to use it. We had passenger numbers of over 1 million in its first year, when that was predicted to be far lower, and actually its success was part of its problem in the early days. But in recent times it's really come into its own. We've got better quality trains in it, we've got more trains, we have more carriages, we have improved and upgraded carriages, we've got better cycling facilities, and the project really in the last year and a half has certainly performed exceedingly well and has been absolutely worth all the investment. And I have to say that, you know, I remember as we took it through the parliamentary stages, and I always wondered just how successful it would be once it's opened. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I don't think I would have believed it would have been quite as successful as it actually has been in those 5 years. It really has been a tremendous project. And I think many borders who didn't want it and said they would never use it, now use the railway on a regular basis. And it's always gratifying to meet people who come up to you in the street who say, I remember when I gave you a hard time at a public meeting, or I criticised you on this particular issue, and actually now I use the railway and it's made a big difference to my life. And that's the simple truth. It's made a big difference to the life of a great many borderers, and an extension would make a huge difference, not only to more borderers, but to those in England, and in particular the city region of Carlisle, who would benefit massively from that extension.
More from David later, but let's go back to the start of the Borders Railway. 10 drivers were recruited from 2,000 who applied. Stuart Farrell from Selkirk was one of them, and he had the honour of driving the first train on the Borders Railway. And 5 years on, he's still there. What are your memories of, you know, that first day, the Golden Ticket Day? Because it was a fantastic celebration for the area.
Yeah, to see all the people that were on the platforms and to drive that first train, that's something that stays with you forever. So it was a real pleasure and a real privilege to be able to do that. So now looking back, I've still got pride there with that.
And most of the time you're working the Borders Railway, but you do get a chance, obviously, to drive other routes as well.
Yeah, we've got quite a variation of routes, so it's good to go and see other places, but you're always coming back and starting at the Borders, which is nice. You get that nice view coming back into Tweedbank, the Eildon Hills, and you know you're home.
Back then, of course, there was something like 2,000 people applying for literally 10 jobs. So you were kind of 1 in 200 or whatever, if my maths is correct. Once you've got that foot in the door, you can go on to many different things within the company.
Yeah, it's certainly a very difficult job to get, but once you get in the door, it is very rewarding. But it's good to see that there is a new generation of drivers wanting to come into the company and wanting to do well. So as long as that demand's there, then the railway will keep going.
So what about your own career path? How do you see it sort of developing in the future?
So from where I am just now as a driver, my next step that I would like to do is become a driver instructor. So teach the new generation coming in, show them the experience and give them my view as a driver and pass it on and help them become their own person. From there you can go on and be managerial and things like that. But certainly my next step is go through the driver instructor.
Of course, there's a lot of talk, undoubtedly, about sort of extending to Hawick and all that kind of thing, going through Melrose and St Boswell stations. At the moment, you know, a lot of people are thinking, well, yes, it could happen. It could go all the way to Carlisle, but it could also just stop at Hawick as well. But I think getting it to Hawick would be a major achievement for the future.
Yeah, certainly for all the people that have campaigned to get it to where it is just now, to see it go further to Hawick and even on to Carlisle for them would be a great success. I think we're a little way off that just now, but you can see the demand, you can see how much the railway is being used. They're definitely answering all the questions to take it to Hawick.
And it's only going to get better because, I mean, 4,000 homes at Shaw Fair, Gorebridge is expanding, everywhere's expanding. So do you think we'll see many changes in the next 10 or so years on the railway itself, the Borders Railway?
On the railway itself, I mean, I think you will. If you look at the history, wherever there's a railway, people build houses and it grows. The economy grows, the places grow. So having a railway only seems to have that growth within. So it's only a good opportunity to bring more to the Borders, which is what this whole thing was about, getting people to come to the Borders and see what we've got to offer.
And you obviously come into contact with the passengers as well. What sort of banter goes on between you and them when you're kind of chatting them about the Borders Railway?
Generally, the most people are excited about being on the railway. They're asking questions about what speed do you go to, what's the view like. So they don't see. You've seen yourself, once you get into the front crab, you've got a different view, a different perspective to see it from. So they just want to be on that other side of the door.
Well, since that interview, delighted to say that Stuart has now qualified as a driving instructor. So many congratulations to him. Now, there's been a few different transport ministers since the Borders Railway was signed off. The new man in the role of Cabinet Secretary of Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity is Michael Matheson. Simon began by asking him if the lack of future-proofing and cutting back of double track on the Borders Railway was the right thing to do.
So I think that's a very good point, because very often, if you look at historically how major transport infrastructure projects have been taken forward, and to some degree wider infrastructure projects, not just transport infrastructure projects, is that they tend to become quite isolated and focused on that project in itself. So it's now, 5 years since the Borders Railway opened. We can see the economic benefits that come from them, and that's why I'm determined to make sure that as we move through Control Period 6, and look at further expansion of our rail network in Scotland. So I, in recent times, announced that we're going to reopen the Leavenmouth line. I also want to look at how we can make sure we maximise the social and economic benefits that come from that. And that's a direct lesson, I think, that we can take from our experience in the Borders. But it's also a lesson we can use in looking to the future and an extension of the existing Borders railway line to make sure we're getting as much benefit out of these types of infrastructure projects as possible.
So have there been lessons learned from the Borders Railway which can be applied to other projects like Leavenmouth? You know, I could say, it was, in hindsight, it's been counterproductive to have built down to the budget and have only 9.5 miles of double track when we might have had 16.5 miles of double track, and that's impacted on the reliability of the railway.
So I think that there's a number of different issues in there. I think there's the way in which we take forward transport projects like new rail projects. And let us keep in mind, this was one of the biggest rail projects in the UK for a normal passenger line in almost 100 years. So it was a major undertaking. But it's important we do learn those lessons. And as I mentioned, the project we're now taking forward in Leavenmouth, I'm determined to make sure that we do learn those lessons. So one of the things that we've put in place, and I was keen to make sure we did, was that we provided funding alongside our funding for the new railway line to help to support some of the economic work that can help to develop some of the benefits of a new line. And that's a direct lesson, in my view, from what happened in the Borders. And to some extent, the Borders railway line has surpassed all of our expectations, and demand has been much greater than we thought it was going to be as well. So clearly the original business case it didn't have the level of analysis that reflected the real success we were going to have with this line. And what we need to do is to make sure that we learn from that type of experience and we build that into our planning and our thinking with future routes.
Could I then put you on the spot and say, if Scotland could lead by example, could I ask, could there be a commitment to extending to Hawick? Could there perhaps be a commitment to collaborating with the Westminster government on connecting that line from Carlisle and making that Borders Railway a through route after all?
Well, I've had a look at some of the really ambitious proposals that have been put forward and looking at connecting Tweedbank into Carlisle. And we've already funded the Borders Transport Route study, which has looked at different options. It's identified 2 potential options for extending the railway, one to Berwick and on Tweed, and the other one to Carlisle. What we're now doing is, through the Borderlands growth deal, which we are putting £85 million into, is that £5 million has been allocated for further detailed analysis work to look at the possibility of extending the route to Carlisle. That work can be taken forward as part of the growth deal as it moves forward. And the UK government are also providing £5 million for their side in taking forward that work as well. So we're already cooperating on this. There's a slight misalignment. We have already carried out some of the study work that they still have to do south of the border, but I've got no doubt they'll press on and take that forward as need be. But there is a real potential, I hear, to see a further extension of the Borders railway line. And the issue is about the timing of that. And at this stage, I can't tell you what the timing of that will be, but I think in principle, given the success, the growth, and the potential to link it in to other parts of the network south of the border, I'm keen to make sure that we look at this in real detail and to see how we can take that forward.
Are those feasibility studies scoped? Do we have heads of terms which say that we're looking at what it will take to extend this railway? Or are we looking at the railway as one alternative?
Well, we're at the point where we've carried out a level of appraisal work that would support the justification to look at an extension of the line. What we now need to do is to carry out much more detailed work on which route would be the most advantageous for us to look at extending it, and to understand what some of the engineering challenges may be in taking forward a project like that. What we need to do is to make sure on the bit south of the border is that they're doing that as well. And that's the bit where there's a need to do a bit further alignment to make sure that they catch up with the element of work that we've already undertaken. Once we've actually had both of those areas of work aligned both north and south of the border, we'll be in a position, I think, to make a much clearer and informed decision about what is the best route and also the potential timescale for an extension of the line.
What if the feasibility study says no? Where does that leave us?
So I think what's important here, going back to the discussion we've already had about what can we learn from the Borders Railway, and it's about making sure that before setting off on a particular course to introduce a new railway line or extend the railway line, that we have considered all of the potential options and we understand the pros and cons of each option and what we can do to maximise the benefit that we can get from any particular option. So there's a bit more work for us to do to make sure that we understand that in enough detail when it comes to any extension of the Borders railway line. Not just in the Scottish side of it, but I think also in England as well. So I think in principle, there's a very strong case and there's a recognition there's a strong case for this. What we need to do is just make sure we've carried out that detailed work in a way that allows us to arrive at the best decision and in an informed way. I'm very open-minded to this. I'm not looking at it with any preconceived view on what I think is the best route and it must be this particular route. I want to just make sure that when we get to the point of selecting that route, we do it in an informed way and that we also think about the wider benefits that we can get once we start rolling forward any extension of the line in the way that I've mentioned that I think wasn't fully considered at the time when the Borders railway line and the business case was put together for it. So I think there's I think some of the lessons we can get from the Borders railway line is to make sure that in the extension of it, we're planning much more around the wider economic and social benefits that we can get from it. And that's the work that the appraisal and some of the engineering work will assist us in understanding in much greater detail.
Well, briefly, Simon, a lot of positivity there from Michael, and interesting that Berwick-upon-Tweed is in the frame.
Yes, it is. If we look back just a couple of years ago, extending the railway wasn't really on the agenda at all. Now we have a number of options being considered. Now, the campaign's stated preferred case is reinstatement of the Waverley route main line through Hawick and on to Carlisle as the spine of an integrated transport network throughout the whole Borders. I certainly welcome extension and looking at other possibilities, but I still say that the campaign's preferred case of building the main line again is the most achievable first option.
Well, we've also heard from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who was keen to take part in the programme, and she sent us a statement. She says it is fitting to mark the 5th anniversary of the Borders Railway and the success it has delivered in boosting the local economy through attracting new homes and residents, opening up employment and education opportunities and encouraging tourism in the region. With the high level of passengers and significant interest in expanding the route, it is appropriate that we are not only looking to electrify the Borders Railway in the future, but also explore the potential benefits of extending the route to either Carlisle or Berwick-upon-Tweed. What's your reaction to that?
Well, look back just 5, 6, 7 years ago, before the railway was built, before the contract was signed, and there was still doubt as to whether we would have any sort of railway at all in the Borders. Now you listen to that statement and it's clear that the political climate and indeed the climate has changed radically, and that railways and extension of the Borders railway is very much on the agenda. I'm very encouraged by that. I really would like to see a firm commitment, but that's what the campaign is about, lobbying for that firm commitment to build the Borders railway all the way through to Carlisle.
The CBR have acquired a new patron, of course, in television presenter Rob Bell, who's a big fan of the Borders Railway, isn't he?
Absolutely, and Rob came up to the Borders to film an episode of Walking Britain's Lost Railways, which has been broadcast on Channel 5 in the UK. Do you know, it really wasn't any effort to get Rob to agree to be patron. He very much, as you said, jumped at the chance. And it's not just about the railway. He was very impressed by the people that he met here in the Borders. And Rob has an involvement in promoting engineering education to young people. And he can see this as being a project which
not just encourages young people to get involved in those STEM subjects, but also something which they can see tangible in their own locale, in their own community, and encourage them to stay and live and work and make their life and careers here in the Borders. And that's the bigger aspect of this project. It's not just about building it to a railway, it's about everything that that railway brings to the Borders.
And of course Rob wanted to be very much part of this programme.
For me, the excitement of the prospect of the Borders Rail being extended all the way through to Carlisle comes from two very simple things. Firstly, I'm a big fan of rail travel anyway. But secondly, as far as I've understood it, the benefits that have already been felt by the communities on the existing Borders Rail would be spread all the way along the Borders region through to Carlisle if it were to be extended, which I cannot help but think would be a great thing for those communities. Communities both on the route itself and further afield, communities around the route. From the time that I spent in the Borders, there's a real sense of pride in the people about their region and this real urge to be active and to do things well. And although times can be challenging, I sense that there was a real optimism for the future that you couldn't help but be swept along by. Now, don't get me wrong, I fully understand that constructing a railway is an enormous undertaking, fraught with all sorts of challenges. Financial challenges, environmental challenges, political challenges, and most interestingly for me, technical, engineering challenges. But we know it can be done. It was done back in the 19th century. And there's a real opportunity here to bring a new generation of engineers into the railway industry, and hopefully many of those involved in the project, if it were to be extended, would come from the Borders region, to bring new blood into the railway industry from the Borders, giving new opportunities to youngsters who are maybe considering their further education or further careers. And what better project to be involved in than one where the foundations were laid 150 years ago, be that metaphorically or possibly even literally. What I would like to bring to the campaign for Borders Rail is to help spread the word, to help promote the benefits that extending the line through to Carlisle would bring to the whole region. I'd like to help bring more people behind the project, to get their weight behind the campaign. And as I have a real personal interest and passion about promoting careers in science and technology and engineering to young people, I would love to maybe open some eyes of young people in the Borders region about how they could be involved through engineering in the project, because it will need an incredible amount of engineering and technical skills to make this a reality. And it feels like that could be a really exciting prospect if you were to be involved in creating something in your community that your friends, your family, your whole region are going to enjoy and benefit from, not just here and now, but for decades, maybe even centuries to come.
Along the Borders Railway, it's been interesting to see that buildings at stations weren't demolished. And 5 years on, we've seen the building at Newton Grange come back to life. And shortly, the same will happen to the Stow station. This is a big result for the town, and indeed the reason Stow even has a station is because of the campaigning which went on. Simon went along to meet up with Helen Corcoran, one of the original campaigners.
Oh, it's really exciting. I mean, we've got so much going on and all the trustees are so behind this project. It's been a real labour of love for the whole community, and coming into it a few years ago and really pushing to make sure that we've got this building in Stow has been a fantastic boost to the village.
And the campaign, of course, fought very hard to get a station here in Stow and get the building retained. You must have a sense of preserving history.
Absolutely. I mean, the building is really quite an early station building. It was opened, of course, when the railway originally opened in the 1840s. So it's an old Victorian building, and there are some bits of it still internally that we're going to be able to preserve. So it's fantastic. The fact that Stow has no pub, no hotel or anything of that nature means that we're lacking any place to meet in the evenings and so on. So to have this new facility is going to be fantastic.
So it's going to be a heart of the community, and I guess that's the importance of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a real community buzz about having this available, to be able to meet up, socialise and do so many different things in the building. But also it's going to mean that we have the ability to actually encourage more visitors to Stow. Stow is a beautiful, lovely little place. We've got loads of walks, cycle tracks, all these types of things that are coming on stream. So we're really hoping to get people to come down in the railway and get off at Stow and come and visit us.
And when people do come on the railway, and very soon we hope that they'll be coming from further afield, what will they see inside when they arrive here?
Well, the station house is going to be what's called a bar kitchen, so they're going to be able to see a lovely eatery, hopefully with a wood burning stove and some atmosphere. There's going to be a little snug where you can have a little private meeting or a few friends together, and there's going to be a meeting room or community room, a slightly larger space, so we can have meetings, you can have private functions and all sorts of different things that we don't really have the ability to do at the moment. So there's lots going to be going on.
Helen, let me just ask you, what's the sense of this project? What does it mean to you?
It really means regenerating a fantastic building, a very early building, and capitalising on the fact that we've got a station. We didn't have that before for a very long time, and we want to regenerate Stow as a place to live and to visit. Stow was a place with numerous shops, numerous eateries, pubs, all sorts of different things going on, hundreds of people being employed in the mill. All these things have gone. So we want to regenerate the whole community and ensure that we've got a place that's going to be the catalyst for so many other regeneration projects in the future.
So it's not just a station, it's not just a railway, it's the start of the rebirth of Stow.
Absolutely, yes, quite agree, Simon. It's going to be the rebirth of so many more things that we're hoping will make this a much more vibrant and make a long-term regeneration of the village.
Let's return to the chat Simon had with Alex Hines, Managing Director of Scotland's Railway. We heard his views on the first 5 years of operations, but what about the future and an extension to Hawick and Carlisle?
Well, my view is that politicians north and south of the border will be looking for a green recovery. They'll be looking for ways to generate jobs and growth. Railways are a brilliant way of doing that.
And of course, it's not just about passengers. I know that your responsibility is for passengers, but the railway is, of course, a passenger and a freight railway. And that would play a part, of course, in any extended railway, indeed, any part of the network.
Definitely. I mean, we have a plan to grow rail freight here in Scotland by 7.5% over the 5-year control period, 2019 to 2024. And in fact, during lockdown, we've been trialling 2 new freight flows, one of which is wholly within Scotland on the Far North Line, which is a timber freight trial. And of course, were we to extend the railway south of Tweedbank, that would be a prime candidate for more freight flows, particularly from the timber market in the Borders region.
I know that the High Speed Rail Group have said as a priority for getting the best return on investment for HS2, extending the Borders Railway and making it a through part of the national network would be quite a critical part of that. So there would be quite a lot of traffic potentially coming through and using an extended through route as a means of avoiding overcrowded lines like the West Coast, for example. And that begs the question, should the railway be built to a standard that can accommodate future traffic? Indeed, should it be future-proofed?
Well, clearly railway projects are very expensive, reassuringly expensive. but they generate massive benefits too. In an ideal world, anything we build would have passive provision for future growth. As I say, this is a matter for UK and Scottish governments, but you're right to raise the point around resilience, having another Anglo-Scot route, but also the fact that both West Coast Main Line and East Coast Main Line are filling up. We've got more operators wanting to run on the East Coast Main Line, for example, and as we know, that double track railway to the south of here is actually quite full, so much so that it's a bit of a squeeze to put the train service in for the new stations that we're going to build on the East Coast Main Line here in Scotland. So yeah, I mean, it's a positive story of growth, and we need to continue working with the UK government and the Scottish government on making the case for more investment in railway projects.
Former Scottish Borders Council leader David Parker gave us his frank opinions earlier in the programme, and never one to mince his words. He wasn't shy about telling us his views on what needs to be done if we're going to see the line extend beyond Tweed Bank.
When you go beyond Tweed Bank, you've got 60 odd miles plus to go. You have a whole raft of engineering challenge. This will be £1 billion plus project. It's going to be a very sizable and significant costly project. And although it can absolutely happen technically, and I believe it can be delivered, somebody somewhere is going to have to argue and secure the funding for that project. And they're going to be competing against a range of other projects in both countries. So there's a lot of work to be done before it's a reality and before that funding is in place. And it's a sizable element of funding that it needs.
OK, we're into our time capsule. We go forward 20 years. Here we are again at Tweed Bank Station. What are we seeing in the Borders as far as trains are concerned?
I think if we're lucky, if we're very lucky and the momentum picks up, and there is a genuine willingness and more money becomes available, we might be at the very beginning of construction of the extension.
That's quite a shock, isn't it? Because we were thinking maybe 10 years' time we'd be at least seeing some work going on.
If you'd asked me that question when we stood here in September 2015, at that point I would have said, with a fair wind, 10 years. I think given the fact it's taken 5 years to do the feasibility study, the challenges of COVID and just the lack of momentum and the big issue around the funding of it, I think the very best I could offer would be 20 years from now we might be starting its construction. But an awful lot of very positive things have to develop to make that a reality.
So the message is everyone's got to really get their finger out.
It's a case of rolling up your sleeves, re-engaging the campaigning, putting in place some more energy and doing more. Press releases are fine, warm words are fine, but actions speak much louder, and both governments need a wake-up call on this extension. If it's going to happen, this project's now got to gain the same amount of momentum that it had when the project was being delivered in its first phase.
So, as it stands at the moment, you think 2040 and we'll only be beginning the project. But if people get their fingers out, then we're talking 2030s.
It could certainly commence in the 2030s. If there's a political will to make it happen, it could commence then. But a lot of work needs to be done to make that a reality. And the campaign for Borders Rail cannot be the only champions for this railway. There need to be a range of people lining up and making it their life's work effectively to make this extension happen if it's going to become a reality.
So, brutal assessment from David Parker, as ever, giving us a straightforward answer. The CBR will take that on board, of course, but the message is everybody has got to step up to the plate.
And that's been the message from day one with the campaign from Borders Rail. Get everyone involved, get everyone behind the project, and we will see it happen. That's how we've got where we are today, with 35 odd miles built here to Tweed Bank. We're going to see the rest of this railway built onwards through Hawick to Carlisle.
Well, you went on record just over a year ago saying you were 100% certain of its return. What percentage are you on now?
I'm still 100% certain, and if I could be more than 100% certain, I would be. The climate has changed in favour of extending this railway. It makes sense economically, it makes sense socially, it makes sense environmentally. I'm absolutely convinced, as I always have been, that this will not be the end of the line. We will see this line extended through Hawick and onto Carlisle.